and welcome to episode 1 of CAFO Crimes, where we discuss the illegal systems that place minority communities disproportionately close to environmental hazards, specifically CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations. In today's episode, we'll be discussing zoning. So, what exactly is zoning? Well, zoning is not inherently bad. It defines which kinds of buildings can be built where. So it creates big house neighborhoods and kind of sketchier neighborhoods, if you want to put it that way. Common restrictions include minimum lot size requirements, minimum square footage requirements, prohibitions on multifamily homes, and limits on the height of buildings. So explicit race-based zoning was banned in 1917, which doesn't mean city planners haven't found ways around it. So, for example, they can preserve homes that are unaffordable to most Black families, which is a whole other conversation about the racial wage gap. So, the average white household headed by someone with a high school diploma has more wealth than the average Black household headed by someone with a college degree. City planners can also change an area's zoning designation from residential to industrial if too many Black families move in, and allocate more commercial zoning to areas where minority communities live. It's very much a vicious cycle. So when Black families are excluded from higher priced neighborhoods, or if neighborhoods where Black families live in are zoned into being less valuable, the homes purchased by Black families will not be worth as much over time as those of white families. And there's also higher rent in low income neighborhoods than you typically see in higher income neighborhoods, which, because landlords can exploit low income individuals, especially when those individuals don't really have anywhere else to go. And that throws families into deep debt and limits their ability to move to a better situation. Now, zoning started out as a means to limit human exposure to toxic chemicals and biological agents, improve environmental quality, and to protect public health. When the first zoning laws were passed in New York in 1916, they were intended to reduce crowding and proximity of businesses to neighborhoods. But historically speaking, when given the means, those in power will give someone the short end of the stick, and this was perfect. So zoning, which was intended to improve people's lives, turned into exclusionary zoning, which is the legal practice of excluding low-income and minority residents using zoning classifications. And a lot of environmental justice literature has found that many low-income populations and populations of color live in neighborhoods that are differentially burdened by noxious land uses like landfills, hazardous waste sites, incinerators, publicly owned treatment works, toxic release inventory facilities, etc., because of discriminatory and exclusionary zoning. So, although zoning was meant to separate people from environmental hazards, make communities healthier, it makes minority communities a lot less healthy. When we're talking about CAFOs, neighbors of concentrated animal feeding operations experience contaminated drinking water, unendurable odor, asthma, and blue baby syndrome from that contaminated drinking water. And that's within a 10-mile radius because the odors emitted by CAFOs, which cause a lot of health problems, more of which we'll get into in our next episode, can travel 10 miles. And they have been found to also increase tension, depression, anger, fatigue, and confusion and less vigor in surrounding communities. Community members can experience CAFO-related PTSD and anxiety caused by declining quality of life. Workers are especially at extreme risk of developing respiratory disease. And at worst, the fumes can lead to deterioration of the brain and nervous system. So definitely a lot of issues with zoning, but there are also some issues associated with redlining, which is not legal. And it, like zoning, has a place in modern American city planning. So what exactly is zoning? It is where city planners label an area as hazardous, and so therefore developers, builders don't want to go there and improve the area. Um, it makes poor and predominantly black neighborhoods and towns function into mortgage deserts. So millions of poor renters accept exploitative housing conditions, not because they can't afford better alternatives, but because they aren't offered any. And it's a major factor in the wealth gap between black and white families, which I mentioned earlier, in that a homeowner in an area once redlined by the government has gained 52% less in personal wealth generated by property value increases over the past 40 years than a homeowner in an area with a better historical rating. And in addition to the economic downsides, there are also health downsides. So, 25% of local African American families now own their homes, compared with 78% of white families in Birmingham, Alabama, specifically. And the practice contributes to the glaring difference in average life expectancy between people in largely African American communities and those in white communities. And residents of redlined areas are more than twice as likely as others to seek emergency room treatment for asthma. So that's just a little bit more about the systems that enable people to be located so close to CAFOs, and more than that, enable certain people to be located disproportionately close to CAFOs. In our next episode, we'll be discussing what exactly CAFOs are, and then we'll get into some of the solutions. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on CAFO Crimes.